show. This is the Players Corner. We like to tackle different issues relating to players, issues they face, sort of the social aspects of gaming, things of that nature. Today we'll be talking about gamer psychology, a very broad topic that we're going to try to break down in a few key areas. So, I think to get started, we'll talk about the distinction between two-player games versus multiplayer games. That's a pretty big distinction, and it really changes the feel of the game. A two-player game is sort of a pure game. It's just you, or same with team games. If you have two teams opposing one another, it's very pure. It's very. There's not a lot of there's no diplomacy. There's no something we'll talk about king making. There's no turtling. You don't have any of these sort of meta strategies of trying to manipulate the way other players see you in the game. You're only worried about countering your opponent's moves and making moves of your own.
Right. There's very little as you said, there's not very much of a meta game in a two-player game, to the extent that you'll have in a multiplayer game, wherein everybody's trying to vie for the same top slot. Mm-hmm. Like you said, with two people, it's very straightforward. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's certain games that can buck this trend. We talked about Yomi, a game where you're very much in your opponent's head, but it doesn't go very much beyond expecting what he's going to play, rather than trying to essentially gyrate your way into first place around everybody else.
Mm-hmm. And you don't have to worry about how other players see you in the game. You only have to worry about, your opponent. You don't have to worry about getting on your opponent's good side,
right?
Or sort of projecting a certain image.
You might be worried about revenge in a two-player game.
Exactly. So with a multiplayer game, by contrast, you have a lot of sort of little issues that come up, and a lot of terms that you need defining.
Absolutely. There's probably one of the most notable aspects of games with a lot of players in it is what's termed the screw the leader effect, wherein when somebody takes a clear lead, everybody else will tend to band together to take that guy down, because as long as that guy is winning, everybody else is not winning. It creates it creates essentially an all against one sort of scenario, which is very common in games of this sort.
And that's sort of the status quo. I mean, that's in some ways what you should be doing, since everyone's stated goal is to win. And if you can do something that furthers your position and weakens somebody else's, you should try to make that weaken the leader's position.
Absolutely, it is not something that is poor. It's almost never a poor choice for a player.
No, and it's not really a design issue either. I mean, it's sort of built into these kinds of games.
It's almost to be expected. This is what you're going to get with a multiplayer game. That's just sort of a fundamental difference.
I think I will mention a game like Small World. A lot of you guys are probably familiar with that. It's a game where it really rewards doing that. It really rewards screwing the leader, because you always get advantages by pushing. You always sort of get rewarded for being offensive.
For sure. But at the same time, it's a game that has some aspects in it that avoid that, but with hidden scores and.
Yeah, and of course, that brings us to the next point. You also have races in Small World, for instance, that reward you for turtling.
Oh, absolutely.
Turtling is when you sort of try to do the opposite. You try to pull out of the metagame. You sort of just isolate yourself and try to build up your own resources and build up your own score without trying to affect anyone else's. You're just saying, well, as long as my score isn't hit by opponents and I'm not hitting theirs, they'll screw each other, I'll come out on top.
Right, it's a sort of dark horse mentality, where if you stay, you don't want to get too far ahead or too far behind. You don't want to get anybody on anybody's bad side. You just don't make any waves, and you try to stay under the radar. Well, speaking of making waves, so that kind of leads us by pun to speaking about king making and the sort of ripple effect that goes on in these games. There's a very common thing in multiplayer games is one player gets so far behind that it becomes almost impossible for him to win. What players will sometimes do is just, choose a target and try to do everything he can to make that guy win. Almost as if they're trying to win by proxy. With
king making, it's a thing that really bugs a lot of players. I mean, a lot of people really get frustrated by players who they say king make. The idea is that, like you said, if I can't be the king, I'll decide who the king is. That's the idea. If I can't win, I will decide who does win. Sometimes this is sort of built on revenge. Sometimes one player will screw you and sort of knock you out of the running, and you'll say, well, I can't get back in it. At least I don't want this guy to profit off my demise here. At least I don't want him to win. And the thing is, people complain about this, but it's really, I don't think it's so much a player fault as a design fault. Because if you have a game, especially a win-more game, In other words, a game where you were rewarded by doing very well, by getting more advantages and more advantages over
a snowball sort of game.
In that kind of game, if somebody gets behind, they know it's deterministic enough they can't catch up. So how could you fault them for sort of giving up their desire to win? It's sort of, it doesn't matter no matter what play they choose, they won't be making a play that will allow them to win. So they have to find another goal.
Right, and to some extent, this sort of activity is unavoidable. If a player is going to lose, no matter what action they take, they're going to have an effect in the game. This is what we mean when we say ripple effect. Any activity that you do as a player who has no hope of winning will not make you win, but will adversely affect somebody.
Yeah, I mean, again, like, everything's interconnected in these games. You can't, for example, another one of my favorites, Citadels. Citadels is a role selection game by Fine Duty, and there are 8 roles in the game. I won't go over them in detail here. We might look at it later in another review. But there are 8 roles, and each role sort of is a check on every other role. And each role gives the player controlling that character certain advantages depending on what they already have in their structure. The cool thing about Citadels is you're constantly affecting the other players whether you want to or not. If you're the assassin, for instance, you have to choose one player to kill, one role specifically. So you're going to affect somebody. You're going to have somebody lose their turn. It doesn't really, no matter who it is, it's going to have an effect on the game. You can't not. It's impossible not to change the way the course of the game goes. You can't pull out.
Right. And that's especially in a game like Citadels, where is another good example of trying to get into your opponent's heads. You have to almost figure out who each player is, which role each player is going to pick.
So you can even target the leader, yeah. Yeah, you can't necessarily target the leader without trying, or by trying.
To segue away from that, one other important aspect of the way gamers think is, I think, very well illuminated by the trader-style game. There's a lot of these that come out recently, I would say. And we have here, the example we have here is a game called Saboteur, in which I've not personally played Saboteur. Would you like to explain it?
Yeah, sure. Saboteur is a big favorite of mine, actually, because most trader games take like 2 to 4 hours. And I enjoy them. I mean, we play a lot of Shadows over Camelot, a lot of Battlestar Galactica, great games. But Saboteur's nice because you can play a whole game in under an hour, which is really nice. And it's also played over several rounds, played over 3 rounds. So even if you don't get to be the trader the first round, you might get another chance. With Saboteur, you're all dwarves, and you can play with up to 10 people, which is nice. And if some of the dwarves are saboteurs, you're all mining through tunnels. And the saboteurs are trying to prevent you from reaching the gold nuggets, and the loyal dwarves are trying to get to the gold nuggets. But it's a classic trader game. It's very straightforward, and you have different things that come out psychologically, and sort of there are common ways across all 3 of these games that you can tell who the trader is. I'd say number 1, being too quiet. I mean, I think most of the traders, especially new traders, their tendency when they are the trader is to kind of panic a little bit.
Right. They get fearful. They get a little bit intimidated by the game, and they kind of just back off. Almost like under the reasoning, because I've been in this situation before. Like when this happened to me, my first thought was, well, if I don't say anything, I can't say anything wrong.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that's a very obvious tell. That comes up time and time again. We'll have a new player being too quiet, and we'll sort of nail them on that. So just something to look out for. The social games are a lot of fun. And really, if you want to sort of maintain anonymity, if you don't want them to catch on, try to keep an even amount of interaction from game to game, because that becomes a huge tell.
Absolutely. Well, is there anything else we can talk about?
No, I think that wraps up gamer psychology, at least what we can handle in one section.
All right, thank you.
So yeah, join us next for a review of Fairy Tail.